Good evening and welcome to Swing State. I'm Fox 8 senior political reporter Bob Buckley, and tonight we're getting unique insight on all things political from another senior reporter, The Hill's senior political reporter Amy Parnes. You may know The Hill, which started as, and still is, a newspaper, but is now also one of the most used and trusted websites. So, Amy, you know your way around The Hill and the people there who matter. You've been covering it for 20 years now. Before we get into the presidential race, the big story, of course, are there any stories you're working on that viewers maybe should be looking out for?
Well, I'm doing a story right now, Bob, on Kamala Harris and her media strategy. A lot of people have kind of flagged this for me in my reporting that it's very similar to President Biden's strategy in that she hasn't done many interviews. Since she became the presumptive nominee, she hasn't done any press conferences. It's almost like and Republicans are saying it's very similar to Biden in that she's avoiding the tough questions, and she's campaigning, on this mythological kind of way without getting pressed. And so we're examining that a little bit and seeing how similar it is to Biden's strategy at the moment.
Well, the truth is they can get away with it because the majority of the media seems to have taken up with the Democratic Party, and they're not going to press them. I mean, she's got a whole series of issues that she didn't say 10, 12 years ago in high school and college. All these statements she made as a candidate in the last presidential cycle that Republicans want to use and that you would think reporters would want her to answer for. Do you think she's ever going to sit down for an interview where she has to answer for them?
She might have to. I mean, the pressure is going to be on. Right now, she's in kind of a honeymoon phase where she's not getting a lot of questions. Democrats are breathing a sigh of relief. They're happy that they have a candidate that is exciting to their base. But I think that will change as everything does. There's going to be questions on Gaza and if for example, if she picks someone like Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, you're going to see her having to defend her policies there and the administration's policies. She's going to have to talk more about the issues. They're going to come back to the forefront, issues like inflation and the economy. And so I think all of this is going to put pressure on her and on the campaign to answer for what her plan is, what the record is and has been under the Biden administration, and what her plan is going forward.
We'll get to the VP pick in a minute, but how do you think it will play when she does have to answer for this? I think the line they're using is she's evolved as part of the administration. Does that wash, or how will this work with the American public?
I mean, she hasn't had a great track record in terms of interviews. She's gotten better over time, but you might recall when she started, she was making quite a few blunders, and that kind of diminished her role coming in as vice president. And so I think that they're kind of scared, I'm sure, about putting her out there and having her make these verbal stumbles. This word salad thing has become a thing on social media, that she's not able to articulate things in a clear and concise way. People always compare her as the female Barack Obama, but one thing he was very good at was articulating all of that in a digestible way that appealed to a lot of people. And a lot of folks don't think that she has the same sort of resonance. And so I'm curious to see how they tackle that.
Well, it's interesting. Barack Obama and she actually were very alike on policy. It's a little unfair to compare anyone to Barack Obama. He was a uniquely talented politician. And I will say, Kamala Harris has gotten much better, the vice president, over these 4 years in doing these interviews and expressing thoughts. But you mentioned the vice presidential pick. Let's get on to that for a second. I think that's scheduled for Tuesday. And
yes.
In Pennsylvania, which sort of hints that it might be Josh Shapiro. I hear there's a lot of pushback in the Democratic Party against having a Jewish person on the top of the ticket with everything that's going on in the Middle East right now. But I got to tell you, he is also a uniquely talented politician, very much by Democratic standards, a moderate. It seems to me he's sort of the no-brainer pick, the obvious, really strong candidate pick.
He really is. I mean, a lot of Democrats, I'm hearing from them every day, are very excited by a potential Josh Shapiro pick. But he also puts the Democrats back on their heels a little bit at a time when they are riding this kind of honeymoon period. And they are going to have to, a few weeks ago, even 10 days ago, they were a fractured party. Now they're coming back together. And I think a lot of people are scared by the fact that if she does pick him, this could further fracture the base. And they could be a little bit put off by this pick. And that's why I'm hearing from some strategists that maybe someone like Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, would be a better pick for Harris. And so, there are also other people like Governor Beshear in Kentucky. I heard as recently as today that he's still among the contenders. So I think a lot of people are still in the mix. The governor of Minnesota as well. So I wouldn't count anyone out at this point.
Well, I predicted Mark Kelly when this whole thing started. I think the challenge with Josh Shapiro is Michigan's essential to win and has the largest of the Arab populations in America, and that could tip it. And you still could put Arizona back and play with a very popular Mark Kelly. Just a couple of minutes left in this first segment, but I want to ask you, before we get on to former President Trump, you have written about the Democratic Party and Vice President Harris's challenges in particular in drawing support from male voters who will be key to winning some of the central states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. What do you know there? Because my understanding is this extends including to black men.
Yes, it's very much a concern. When I ask Democrats about their biggest fears right now, it's that she doesn't appeal to white male voters. They're very, very conscious of the fact that former President Trump won them in 2016 and won them in 2020, and Biden was able to make inroads there, obviously, in these key states that catapulted him to the White House. But they're also worried, and this has been a big worry and a big fear. And one of the reasons why President Biden didn't step aside sooner, that she doesn't have the same connection with white male voters, and a lot of them are put off by her. You hear a lot of talk about it even now, that they're just, they can't, they can't vote for her. And so I think you're seeing them try to make some inroads there and try to talk to these groups more. I know that she's going to be in these key swing states starting next week with her running mate. And so they're hoping that will change. But that is definitely a big scare for Democrats at the moment.
Okay. We're going to get into that in a little bit in our next segment, a little deeper. But, Amy's publication is called The Hill for a reason. And next, we'll also get into what's happening there and how this fall's elections might change things. We are back with Amy Parnes, a senior political reporter with The Hill, which covers D.C. politics as well as anyone, and part of our Nexstar network as well. Amy, we were talking before the break about Vice President Harris does have a challenge in attracting male voters, certainly white male voters, but also black male voters from my anecdotal reporting on this. Have you heard what the cause of that might be?
Well, it's been a problem for the Democratic Party since 2016. There have been polls and surveys done and focus groups, and a lot of these black voters feel as though the Democratic Party has left them behind, isn't paying attention to the issues they care about. And so I think that this is a constant problem that Democrats are facing. I think President Biden was facing the same problem. And I think Kamala Harris is also dealing with that problem, which is why there is this intense focus right now, not only to gain black women who are so supportive of her, obviously, in her historic campaign, but to actually reach out to black male voters. And so you're seeing that. And I think you're going to continue to see this push because they need, if they're not going to turn out white voters, white male voters in these key states, Rust Belt states, for example, I think they're going to really need to attract more black voters to their ticket.
Although, of course, they made a big deal of the phone calls they had last week about, the white men for Harris, black men for Harris. They sort of segmented people off into these groups, as the Democratic Party seems to like to do. I need to mention, though, that your organization is called The Hill for a reason. How do you see the congressional election shaping up? Because that's huge in all this for any president to get anything done. Both parties seem to think they can win both houses of Congress. I'm not so sure that's true. How do you see it shaping up?
Well, so far, I think the general consensus is that Republicans will win the Senate, but barely, and Democrats will gain control of the House. And that's one of the reasons why there was so much pressure on President Biden to withdraw from the race because they were in jeopardy of losing the House as well. And that was a nightmare for a lot of people. You had former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi very involved in these discussions because she was hearing from a lot of these House members that they were in jeopardy. They felt they were in jeopardy of losing. And Democrats are almost willing to take the gamble and put everything they have into the House because their worst case scenario would be Republicans controlling all three. And so I think their major focus right now is in winning the House, and that's what I'm hearing from a lot of sources.
You know, what is the view up there of North Carolina as an important state? We're now, I think, the eighth most electoral votes. That's kind of nice. It seems like Republicans, to a degree, are beginning to take the state for granted. Democrats are getting more engaged and saying, well, wow, we can really win this state for a change. What's the view from up there?
Well, I think that it's a very important state, and you can see it by the ad buys. Republicans are doubling down. I think they're scared now that are growing more anxious that Kamala Harris is really making a play and they think that Democrats can win the state. So you're seeing Republicans kind of double down and try to protect the state. This was a safe state as of a few weeks ago, and now it could be up for grabs. And so I think it's going to continue to be a fierce battle for the state. And you're going to see both candidates spend a lot of time there, especially if Donald Trump feels like Kamala Harris is making a lot of inroads with Black female voters in the state. He's going to continue to make a play for it and try to keep North Carolina in his column.
Of course, former President Trump was here in July. Vice President Harris is due here later this week on Thursday. Next up, though, on the calendar is the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It begins August 19th. What do you think we're going to see? There's a lot of talk of echoes of '68. I'm not so sure the parallel is great. There could be some protests, but there'll be different protests. What are you guys hearing about what's going to happen? Are the Democrats taking preventive action? Because I got to tell you, in 2004, there were a lot of protesters at the Democratic Convention in Boston, and they put them all in a cage and put tarps around the cage so you couldn't even see them protesting. It was quite a power move by the Democratic Party then. What are you hearing about this time?
Yeah, and you know, the last convention that was actually a convention in 2016, you had a similar dynamic where Bernie Sanders voters were protesting, and you had a lot of climate progressive voters kind of protesting there, and they had a plan. They had a plan in place, you know, that for the crowd to cheer louder and to hold up American flags and sway them and kind of drown out the noise of these progressive groups. And so that happened. And I think that is on the minds, of course, of many Democrats. Of course, you have a big tent party with a lot of views. You have a conflict in Gaza that is, like I said before, it has the potential of fracturing the party, particularly if Kamala Harris does select someone like Shapiro. And so I think that they are on alert, I guess you can say, for any sort of distraction, if you will. I think that there are plans in place to make sure that things go well. And you can already see, I'm reporting today that President Biden will appear as one of the first speakers on the first day to kind of lay the groundwork and unify the party. And that is obviously done intentionally. They know what the party has been through in the last few weeks. They want to unify. They want to show the Republican Party that they are just as unified as the Republicans were during their convention in Milwaukee.
You know, I need to ask, what is the tenor on the Hill these days? It seems from afar as if Democrats and Republicans won't even talk to each other, much less work with each other to get stuff done. What's your sense?
It's definitely changed a lot, Bob, since I have covered Washington. I remember when I first was a cover reporter covering Congress in 2005. There were arguments, obviously, and a lot of discussions and a lot of disagreements about policy. But I think a lot of people were still close in terms of, you know, talking to one another. They had friends across the aisle. You're still seeing a lot of that. There are behind the scenes, you know, that they chat and they're friendly with one another. But I would say the political rhetoric is kind of ramped up and heated up, particularly right now around the presidential election, with the election coming and these down ballot races. So it's definitely changed a lot. A lot of people are hoping that the fever will break at some point, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be going in the other direction. Particularly, you saw what happened with the attempted assassination and the hearings. And I think that there are people that will be kind of tugging at both sides and trying to make this a political thing. And it remains to be seen how this goes, but I don't think it gets better anytime soon.
Yeah, that's encouraging, huh?
Yeah.
All right,
Exactly.
we appreciate that. You know, there's more to get to tonight, including how things have changed in covering Congress and the presidency over the years. Stay with us. We are back with The Hill senior political reporter Amy Parnes. And Amy, you know, I think the thing we've heard so much about, we're going to hear in every breath between now and the election from Democrats, is Project 2025. It is it's like a all-encompassing wish list by every conservative group in the country. And the Heritage Foundation is overseeing it. The Trump camp felt it was enough of a drag on them that they had to come out and say, got nothing to do with us. What's your take on all this? Is it Democrats really fear that it's going to be a big deal? Republicans keep saying it'll never make it into law. What's the reality here?
I mean, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, obviously, Bob, but I think it's been enough to scare Democrats. You see on MSNBC and other channels that they are talking about this nonstop. And then you see on the other end that they're very scared that people, you know, they feel like they've hit their ceiling in terms of Republican support, but in terms of gaining independence and growing their support, this is kind of a scary thing for a lot of people. And so that's why you've seen Trump kind of distance himself from this. He doesn't want anything to do with it right now. He said, look, these are people that, you know, might have worked for me, but this isn't anything that I have in mind. And so I think you're going to continue to hear him say that in the coming weeks. I think that no one wants to really, in his camp, wants to really own that at this point.
Well, and the reality is, especially if they lose the House, there's no way they can get any of this stuff passed.
No.
And, you know, you'll hear some Democrats say, well, it'll be put in by executive order. I think that's really next to impossible on most of this stuff. Let's talk a little bit about your organization, The Hill. Founded in 1994 as a newspaper. Now it's really, I think I've thought of more of as a website. How does it operate? What's going on there? And how should people look at it and use it?
It's changed a lot since I started there 13 years ago. But it started as a newspaper that appealed to lawmakers and lobbyists and people in Washington, and now it's read across the world. And it's changed for me in terms of deadlines. I know that when we have a paper, I still of course have a traditional 5 o'clock deadline as a print reporter does for the next day's paper, but I have rolling deadlines across the day. I will have days where I file 1 or 2 stories by noon or by 3 o'clock. And especially with this grueling, never-ending news cycle of the last few weeks, where you had a former president being charged, you had an attempted assassination, you had a debate that went awry and led to a withdrawal of a presidential candidate. I mean, this is stuff that you really can't make up. It's in the truth is stranger than fiction category. And so it has made reporters like me work nonstop, work 20-hour days on very little sleep. And so that has changed a lot for all of us this cycle.
Yeah, but at least we all get rich in this line of work, right? We got that going for us.
Right.
I want to touch back
to watch.
In a second. I'm going to touch back to the debate thing you mentioned. But before I do, I have to mention that I remember watching an old clip from The Tonight Show. I think it was in the late 60s, 69 or so. Chet Huntley, the famous NBC anchor, was on there. And then when they were doing an hour or so of news a day, an hour and a half most stations, 30 minutes of nationals, that was it. He complained, there's just not enough time to sit back and think about the news. Oh my gosh, Chet, live in our world.
It's very true.
Yeah,
there is no thinking right now. It's just doing.
All right, let's get back to, you mentioned the debate gone awry, but the truth is we have seen the reporting that Nancy Pelosi warned everyone in 2021 that the president had severely declined already. How much is this plan of attack by the Republicans saying the Democrats, and including Vice President Harris, covered up his decline and knew about it? I don't see how they could not know about it. And also, to what degree is the media not complicit in this, that no one in the media called it out?
I mean, we definitely, I know I reported stories, my colleagues reported stories on age and mental acuity and dating back to the last cycle even. And it's continued to be a big part of our narrative. So I don't think we completely ignored it. Of course, I think the party is to blame in some way for not, and I'm hearing this from a lot of Democrats, that there was a lot of anger. They really wanted an open primary. They wanted someone to compete against Biden. And they were kind of, the anger that I was picking up on in the last few weeks is, why didn't we do that? We knew that this was a problem for us. We should have done that. A lot of people think Harris would have won anyway. And they could have resolved this now. And now they're kind of on their heels. They're running a race with less than 100 days to go. It's not an ideal position for anyone, for any party to be in going forward. You have to, while Kamala Harris inherited the campaign and its infrastructure, she has to now run and define herself before her opponent defines her. And that is going to be the greatest challenge for her going forward.
But like you said, there's less time for the other side to define her, and they can just parry one or two of those and hopefully get over the line on Election Day. It can be a real advantage to them in that way too, I would think.
Yeah, and I think they're seeing it as sort of racing, a race against the clock, and that's definitely what they're trying to do, and trying to build on this enthusiasm that they've seen since Biden withdrew from the race.
Just about a minute to go, but I want to wrap up with this idea that we hear every election cycle. This is the most important one of our life. Democracy is on the ballot. We may not have a republic again if this person or that person wins. My experience is, it can get bad at times. It's never that bad. Of course, you've got to be diligent to make sure it doesn't get that bad. But I mean, what's your take? What would you tell voters who are afraid? Because both sides feel if the other person wins, we're done.
Yeah, it's never as bad, I think, as it seems, but certainly it's being portrayed that way on both sides. And, it's going to be a race in the margins. It's going to be won in the margin. It's going to be a very close race. And so I think that obviously every vote counts right now, and that's what they're trying to. I don't think this is going to be a washout in any way. I think that, for one side or another, I think it's going to come down. You had in 2020 a 40,000 vote race in 3 states. The difference was in 40,000 votes, not that much.
Right.
And so I think it's going to come down to that again.
All right. Well, that's it for tonight. Remember, we're not just a TV show, we're also a podcast. You can get us anywhere you get your podcasts. Just search Swing State. See you next week.